Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We are continuing our fun Roman series where we are basically looking through the Roman Republic and we're just going, we're just flowing at this point. There's probably some things that we've missed along the way, but we're at the Jugurthine War. This, of course, done a little bit of research on this, but not enough to where I'm going to be an expert at any point. But this, of course, is in the region of Numidia, a former ally of Rome during the Punic Wars. Basically, Jugurtha is actually one of the illegitimate sons of a previous king who died of the region. And he basically killed one of his brothers and then eventually killed his other brother, which were legitimate heirs. And now he has basically unified the entire nation of Numidia, which, of course, alongside killing his brothers, he also killed some Roman citizens, which is not too fond of which the Roman Senate's not too fond of. So, here we are. Glad you're here. Let's jump right in and see where this takes us. House of History.
It was a hot summer day, 109 BC. Somewhere in the kingdom of Numidia, King Jugurtha and around 20,000 of his soldiers hid behind bushes on a hill. Though the heat made it challenging to keep the elephants and horses in check, their position was incredibly strategic. The river Mutul, across the empty plain, was the region's only water source. As they hid, the Roman army sent to Numidia to defeat Jugurtha trotted along into the plain. Jugurtha kept his men at bay. They waited until they were in an ideal position. Only then would they attack. This ambush, Jugurtha thought, would surely lead to victory. In the 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic expanded its border significantly. Some areas were bequeathed, Rome conquered others. One such war leading to conquest was the Numidian War in Hispania. One notable commander of Rome's auxiliary units was
Scipio Aeomenius?
Jugurtha, the nephew of Numidian king Micipsa.
Part of that.
Numidia, the North African kingdom, had been a loyal Roman ally since the Punic Wars. Thanks to his service during the war, Jugurtha was no stranger to Roman military tactics. He became infamous among his enemies, but famous and respected among the Romans. Roman commander Scipio Aemilianus wrote to King Micipsa of his conduct. I am sure that you will be pleased to hear that in this war your nephew Jugurtha has distinguished himself above all others. I have high regard for what he has done for us, and I will do everything in my power to pass that esteem on to the Roman Senate and people. Speaking as your friend, I have to congratulate you personally for finding a man who is worthy of yourself and your father. In the years after the war, Micipsa adopted Jugurtha. In 118 BC, the king passed away. He bequeathed his kingdom to his 2 sons and the adopted Jugurtha. But Jugurtha wasn't planning on sharing the throne. Right after Micipsa passed away, he ordered the murder of his brothers. One of them was killed. The other, Adherbal, fled to Rome to request aid against his adoptive brother. When he appeared before the Senate, he reportedly said, "It is not my fault, fathers of the Senate, that I have to turn to you yet again. No, I am forced to do this because of the violence of Jugurtha. He so desperately wants to destroy me that he pays no attention either to you or to the immortal gods. More than anything else, he thirsts for my blood."
I mean, we've seen this all the time. People who have... That's the problem when you have, like, so many heirs to divide a kingdom. They're inevitably going to fight each other. It's inevitable.
The Romans sent a delegation to Numidia to broker peace between the brothers in response. This appeared to be successful as Jugurtha accepted the kingdom being split in half.
More favorably in Jugurtha towards the west, where you would have more of the eastern side, or Adherbal. The western side of Numidia was clearly more fertile and more favorable, but with no leverage, the Adherbal brother just accepted. I mean, what else is he going to do?
He bribed the Roman delegation, however. he awarded himself the wealthiest part and immediately prepared for the inevitable war he foresaw. 3 years later, in 113 BC, after many unanswered provocations, Jugurtha simply invaded Adherbal's part of Numidia. Before too long, Adherbal was cornered in his capital, Cirta. Together with Italian traders living there, he resisted Jugurtha's continued besiegement. As the besiegement was ongoing, Rome sent a second delegation to mediate peace. Once again, the delegation was bribed, although some sources indicate they simply lacked military strength and power. When Jugurtha subsequently took the city, he did not hold back. He tortured his brother to death and killed every adult male. In this act of brutality, Jugurtha overplayed his hand. Many Italian traders in the city had connections with Roman senators.
Many were Roman citizens too.
Executing those Italians was one step too far for Rome, and upon learning of these events, they declared war. The first army, commanded by consul Lucius Calpurnius Bestia, did not see any battle, because upon their arrival, Jugurtha immediately surrendered. Bestia offered peace conditions that were so favorable, the Senate actually opened a formal investigation to see if Jugurtha once again bribed someone. Jugurtha was called to Rome to testify. Granted temporary immunity, he decided to have his nephew and rival living in Rome in exile assassinated. He did not hide his involvement and was subsequently chased out of the city.
What do you mean chased out? Trial him.
Peace never came to be. A new mission commanded by Postumius Albinus arrived in Numidia in 110 BC. Despite no detailed accounts surviving, Postumius likely got ambushed nearby the city of Sutul, where Jugurtha kept his treasury. This defeat infuriated Rome even more. In 109, a new sizable force under Quintus Caecilius Metellus arrived on Numidian shores. Metellus, known for being incorruptible, would be a different enemy altogether.
I guess he's raising the land right now, Metellus.
With lightning speed, Metellus captured the cities as he trekked westward to seize Numidia's heartland. Jugurtha decided to use the terrain to his advantage and set up an ambush nearby the river Mutul. Jugurtha was known for putting a lot of thought and effort into selecting battle sites. Thanks to the Roman historian Gaius Sallustius Crispus, a detailed description of the battleground survives.
Wow. I don't know if that's animation, like that square, or if that's actual, somehow, what the actual drawing originally looked like. It's really good.
There was a river flowing from the south called the Mutul, and about 20 miles from it was a naturally desolate and uncultivated range of hills running parallel with the river. On this hill, which flanked the Romans' line of march, Jugurtha took his position with his line greatly extended. He commanded around 20,000 soldiers, of whom up to 5,000 cavalry and a few dozen elephants. His infantry,
that's a ton of noise you gotta keep down,
and cavalry were lightly armored, more mobile than the Romans, and knew the region much better. The location was perfect for an ambush. Jugurtha hid most of his soldiers behind the bushes on the hill, so it was impossible to estimate the actual size of his force. In addition, the river Mutul formed a natural barrier if the Romans were to attempt a retreat. Although the plan was great in theory, Metellus spotted Jugurtha's ambush from a distance. However, that did not mean his legions avoided battle, as they were desperate to have their water resupplied. So in response to Jugurtha's anticipated ambush, Metellus rearranged his forces. Marius led the vanguard, while Metellus commanded the cavalry and main body following. Because the right flank faced the Numidians stationed on the hills, he strengthened it with 3 lines of reserves. Sallust reveals, between the soldiers he placed the slingers and archers, while on the wings he stationed all the cavalry, and after a brief address, which was all that there was time for, led the army down into the plain in its new formation, with what had been its front marching at the right angles to the direction of the enemy. To Metellus' surprise, Jugurtha did not attack immediately. The logical conclusion was that the king planned to launch several smaller attacks against the Romans to tire them out, a destructive tactic if successful.
Or they just wanted, I mean, I'm just guesstimating here, or they wanted them to be totally in a certain place before they could escape.
In response, Metellus ordered the cavalry unit to dash towards the river and set up camp there. If the battle became prolonged, at least the Romans would have access to water. Seeing the cavalry move onto the river, Jugurtha ordered his general Bomilcar to take 40 elephants, some infantry, and shadow them.
Dang.
As the small cavalry contingent set up camp, the entire Roman army continued their march into the plain. As soon as the rearguard was at a safe distance from the passage through which they came, Jugurtha ordered his army to execute their plan. 2,000 Numidian infantry soldiers rushed downhill on the side and swerved into the plain, blocking any escape route. Being the first to face combat, the infantry in the rearguard suffered significant casualties. The vast majority of Jugurtha's army now descended from the hill and crashed into the Roman
Dang.
warfare. Brutal close combat broke out and ferocious fighting took place among the entire line of Romans. In the rear, not just the right flank suffered rough fighting, as Metellus expected. The 2,000 Numidian soldiers enveloped the rear of the Romans entirely. As for the type of fighting, the Romans had trouble keeping up with the Numidian soldiers. Most of the attacks were perpetrated as hit-and-run tactics, and while the Roman lines weren't wide enough to have dedicated pila throwers, the Numidians remaining on the hill
They're just throwing lances and rocks at them.
eagerly threw their spears and rocks at the Roman infantry. Whenever the infantry gained the upper hand, Numidian soldiers simply retreated, only to return with a vengeance once they recollected themselves. Up until this point, the cavalry had not seen combat yet, but that was soon to change. Metellus ordered part of his cavalry to charge against the Numidian cavalry. Instead of fighting them head-on,
That's the best cavalry in the world at this point.
Jugurtha ordered his cavalry explicitly to disperse as soon as they faced a cavalry charge. They could quickly surround the Roman cavalry squadron thanks to their numerical superiority, and this is exactly what happened. When the Romans realized they weren't charging into anything, they stopped their charge.
They're gonna get surrounded.
They were pelted with missiles as soon as they stopped and attacked by Numidian horsemen in their rear and flanks. The battle continued like this for hours. The Romans maintained their formation under challenging circumstances, being in a wide open plain and suffering continuous attacks and harassment by the Numidians. They would be done for if their formation broke, considering they were more or less surrounded. Throughout the fight, Metellus encouraged his men with this fact. The only alternative to victory was certain death. Meanwhile, Bomilcar finally decided to launch his assault against the river squadron. 40 elephants and thousands of infantry charged towards the outnumbered Romans. The Romans responded to the charge by themselves charging at them head-on. What happened next is nothing short of farcical. Though the entire plain was a desert, the elephants somehow tripped over some undergrowth. The elephants tripping was enough to cause the infantry to turn around and flee the battlefield.
What the crap? That's embarrassing right there. That's embarrassing.
Sallust writes that the Romans killed most of the elephants and captured a few.
Dang.
The river squadron now turned around to ride towards the main Roman army, who were still embattled. A near disaster was averted when the main army thought the approaching horsemen were Numidians. Scouts informing the commanders the river squadron was returning were the only reason they did not end up getting a beating by their own men. Reinforced, Metellus ordered his infantry to push forward uphill to force the Numidians to continue the close combat fight. This advance surprised the lightly armored Numidians so much that most of them simply scattered or were crushed by the advancing bulwark. By this time, it became clear the Romans had the upper hand, and most of the Numidian soldiers retreated or fought to the death. Jugurtha retreated from the battlefield together with Bomilcar. There are no casualty numbers given, although it is safe to say the Romans suffered far less than the Numidians.
And it did not look like that was going to happen originally. It looked like the Numidians were going to overwhelm them on all fronts, but it didn't happen.
Despite outnumbering the Romans nearly 2-1 and choosing the battlefield himself, Jugurtha suffered a painful defeat.
Yeah.
The battle's outcome says a lot about the quality of the Roman legionaries present during the campaign. Or perhaps it said a lot about the lack of military experience of the Numidians. After all, Jugurtha levied most of his soldiers from local farms and towns. Though the Romans enjoyed a clear victory, they suffered enough casualties for Metellus to spend 4 days reorganizing his army before continuing the march into Numidia's heartland. Once they embarked on the march, they burned the fertile grounds and strongholds of Numidia. Metellus did not want the war to drag out much longer, nor did he fancy facing guerrilla warfare. However, this is precisely what happened. As the campaign of 109 BC ended, the war was by no means over.
That's crazy. We're gonna do this whole video, by the way. Obviously you guys know that. You see how long this video is. But so we're gonna be talking about the first battle of Cirta next, which is the capital of Adberhal's brother to die, his region that was now completely taken over. The Battle of Muthul River, though, like he said, he summed it up perfectly. It was overwhelmed. These people were just probably lack of experience. The floundering on the right hand side was embarrassing, just embarrassing, honestly. When it comes to the elephants, what was going on with the elephants over there? That is insane. All right, so now we're going to continue with the first battle of Cirta.
On an early morning in 106 BC, mist surrounded the Romans quartering nearby the Numidian city of Cirta. Their campaign season had ended, and they looked back on a fruitful, though perhaps a bit quiet campaign. The Roman commander Marius wanted to get his soldiers to their winter quarters as soon as possible.
Hold on, guys, 1 second. All right.
Marius wanted to get scouts, so perhaps Cirta. 6 BC, mist surrounded the Romans quartering nearby the Numidian city of Cirta. Their campaign season had ended, and they looked back on a fruitful, though perhaps a bit quiet campaign. The Roman commander Marius wanted to get his soldiers to their winter quarters as soon as possible. He told a few scouts to ensure there weren't any significant dangers heading towards them. He was aware his adversary, Numidian king Jugurtha, concluded an alliance with the neighboring king of the Mauri, Bacchus. It doubled hostile forces in the region. Suddenly, he heard his scouts shouting as they ran towards the Roman camp. In the distance, Marius saw a sight that terrified him, and he hastily began shouting orders at his men. Jugurtha and Bacchus rode at the head of an army which dwarfed his. There was no time to prepare appropriately. As the first arrows hit the ground before him, he knew the battle would soon commence. The war against Numidian king Jugurtha had been waging on since 112 BC. Several armies sent by Rome tried and failed to defeat the rogue king. After finally earning a victory at Muthul River, Commander Metellus continued capturing towns and fortresses to prevent Jugurtha from having a solid strategic footing in his lands. He left behind small Roman units to maintain control wherever his main army wasn't. Jugurtha understood if he could not beat them in battle, he would have more success harassing and ambushing small Roman contingents. So Metellus split his army into two, with Marius commanding one half. Both armies shadowed each other, preventing Jugurtha from ambushing any stray Roman units. In response, Jugurtha burned crops and poisoned water sources. Metellus did not feel for fighting a prolonged battle against an invisible enemy, and
it's like a war of attrition at that point.
He laid siege to Zama to lure Jugurtha out. A group of Roman deserters warned the rogue king, who was preparing the defense of Zama. Duly warned, he retreated into the hills with his cavalry. A minor skirmish between Jugurtha and Marius followed later that month. As the campaigning season ran to an end, there was no end in sight for the war. Metellus tried to use diplomacy to broker peace with Jugurtha, but to no avail.
If we pardon you?
Meanwhile, Metellus' popularity in Rome ensured him to lead another year of campaigning in Africa. However, his own ranks weren't too enthusiastic about the commander. Despite many deserters at the lower level, The main danger was personified by his deputy, Gaius Marius. Marius was convinced he could do a better job and quickly wrap up the war. In winter, he requested Metellus to return to Rome to stand for consul. Metellus initially refused, but after multiple intrigues, he allowed Marius to depart to get rid of him.
Yeah.
He wouldn't stand a chance to get elected anyway. He wasn't even of Roman noble origin, but he was Italian. As the campaigning season began in 108 BC, the Romans once again invaded Numidia. Though no comprehensive sources survive, it is clear Metellus' army besieged the fortress of Thala, capturing it together with most of Jugurtha's treasury. Besides this disaster, there are barely any details available of this campaign. As the season ended, things did not look good for Jugurtha. But when he was at his lowest point, did things turn around? He managed to attain an alliance with the Mauri and Gaetulians to the west and south.
That's going to be even more of a thorn in Metellus' side, because they're going to have a pipeline of possible alliance mercenaries or alliance troops come from these places. Possibly. You know, it would be better if Metellus was able to, maybe not Metellus, but Rome was able to like construct more of alliances. But at this point, a lot of these people probably think Rome is the aggressor here. It's just how it looks.
These supplied ample soldiers. Especially King Bocchus of the Mauri felt Jugurtha was a less threatening neighbor than the Romans.
See?
The fact Jugurtha promised him a portion of his kingdom for his help probably influenced his decision.
That's... and there's no... Given Jugurtha's, you know, what he's done prior, it's just hot air. There's no way he would actually give up his kingdom.
This alliance of two kings re-invaded Numidia and laid siege to the capital of Cirta, but this new alliance was the least of Metellus' worries. As he camped nearby Cirta, he received news of Rome. Marius was elected consul, but he was also elected commander against Jugurtha.
Oh, well...
Metellus, this felt nothing short of betrayal. Unfortunately, sources do not reveal what happened next, but what is for sure is that the siege of Cirta did not end in victory. When Marius returned to Roman Africa and assumed command of the army, Metellus refused to meet with him to hand over command, counter to Roman tradition.
So much pride.
Marius brought over a sizable army from Italy, increasing the Roman numbers significantly.
Good!
Perhaps ironically, Marius continued with a strategy which was very similar to that of Metellus. He laid sieges to cities, towns and forts, capturing Jugurtha's primary treasury house located near the Mauritanian border. Bocchus and Jugurtha separately roamed around Numidia, actively avoiding the Romans. As the population became alienated and Marius' army continued seizing strategic objectives, Jugurtha desperately required Bocchus' aid. The Mauri king avoided the Romans even more than Jugurtha though, mainly because he wasn't sure which outcome of the war would benefit him most.
I mean, they don't have like the 30,000 foot view like we have right here, but Bocchus, kind of like in a tough situation. He's probably seeing like a huge pressure from like just over the Strait of Gibraltar, even though it's not called that at the time. Iberia is Rome. Now Rome has Carthage. Now Rome is trying to take down his like it feels like it's a domino effect that's going to eventually reach his side of the world. So like it's like, do we stand and fight? And then like, do I actually trust my neighbor? Not really. But what else do I have? Do I trust the Romans? Probably his best chance ever at this was to be like a vassal state to Rome, like a hindsight POV. However, even doing that, you know Jugurtha's track record. He could try to inflict damage to you internally, maybe get you assassinated, or try to create two fronts of the war and just make a longer just bleed of this. But it's more or less like Bocchus is probably like, what am I to do?
However, when Jugurtha offered him 1/3 of his kingdom, he was sure.
It's hot air. There's no way this guy's really serious about giving up his kingdom.
In response, Bocchus marched a large army of Maori cavalry into Numidia from the west. Jugurtha's main force was able to link up with them. Here is where ancient sources conflict a little. For example, Orosorius claims Marius was laying siege to Cirta preceding this battle. However, Sallust agrees it is highly unlikely. Around this time of the war, Cirta was still in Jugurthine hands, mainly because he had been evading the Romans for most of the campaigns, and the Romans made it their goal to capture as many cities and strongholds as possible. At any rate, both accounts agree on the location of the battle, close by Cirta. As Marius and his Roman army quartered close by Cirta, he deployed scouts to keep an eye on potential ambushes by Jugurtha. He wanted to get to his winter quarters as soon as possible. Unfortunately, there are no numbers available for the size of the Roman army, although it likely numbered between 30 and 40,000
Dang, that's like 6 to 8 legions.
men, both cavalry and infantry. As soon as a few of his scouts informed the commander a Jugurthine army indeed was closing in on them, screams arose from the distance. The enemy was closer than anticipated. Before the Roman commanders could order their troops in formation, the combined Maori and Gaetulian cavalry charged at the Romans. This army outnumbered the Romans at least 2 to 1. Instead of a frontal charge, many horsemen maintained their distance from the Roman camp, pelting the legionaries with javelins.
You can give them at least some credit for being not suicidal, because they saw how impactful the legionaries are. I'm guessing Jugurtha's up top and the Maoris on the left, but yeah, they're probably just they're doing raids at this point, like hit and running.
The Romans in turn quickly took to arms and rushed to take their formations. The Roman cavalry mounted their horses to launch a countercharge. Meanwhile, some Maori cavalry charged into the Romans, although they
Really? That's suicidal.
harnessed the typical lack of strategy the Romans became accustomed to from their enemies. But even though the Romans were a disciplined army, a real formation to counter the ambush had not yet been taken, Sallust describes. The combat was more like that of an attack of brigands than a battle. Without standards and in disorder, horse and foot massed together, some gave ground, others slew their opponents. Many who were bravely fighting against the enemy were surrounded from the rear. Valor and arms were not sufficient protection against a foe who was superior in numbers and attacked every side. At last, the Romans, both the raw recruits and the veterans, who as such were skilled in warfare if the nature of the ground brought any of them together, formed a circle, thus protecting themselves on every side and presenting an orderly front.
That's very impressive for the Romans to be able to, off a whim. I mean, they're very disciplined, obviously. They're able to like regroup, reform, and then defend.
To the attacks of the enemy. The soldiers who did not see direct combat rushed to parts of the line which required reinforcement. The battleground was scattered, as was customary whenever the Romans engaged Jugurtha's army. Some soldiers threw rocks at the Romans, others...
And was Jugurtha and Bocchus both present at the war? It looks, I mean the battle shows that they are.
pelted them with javelins, and yet others charged at them. Marius and his bodyguard moved behind Roman legionaries fighting, shouting encouraging words and motivating the men to fight. When his shouts were drained out, instead Marius simply joined the fight to lead by example.
How old is Marius?
The fighting went on for several hours like this. By the time the day ended, the Romans were unpleasantly surprised by Jugurtha's army not slowing down their attack one bit. Likely, this was caused by Jugurtha convincing his soldiers that darkness would be advantageous to them. Understanding their adversaries were willing to continue the fight throughout the night, Marius rapidly adapted his battle plan. There were 2 hills close by the battleground. Marius ordered his deputy Lucius Cornelius Sulla and the cavalry to seize the hill with the spring on top. Then, together with his infantry, he made an effort to reach the other hill. The bulwark of Romans pushed through their adversaries, climbing the hill while fending off attacks. Not being able to seize the hills, Jugurtha's army understood their unfavorable position and the immense costs of attacking the Romans. Finally, the night turned quiet as Jugurtha's army set up camp on the elevated ground in front of the 2 Roman hills. Scattered tents and fires illuminated the plain. Jugurtha's army could not defeat the Romans, but meanwhile, the Romans were trapped on the hills, unable to break out. Marius ordered his men to keep completely quiet throughout the night. Usually night watches used audible signals to communicate, but even they were forbidden from making noise. Then, around a fire,
Are they scared? Are they just trying to survive at this point?
Marius and his commanders planned the counterattack to launch at sunrise. Throughout the night, Jugurtha's soldiers kept a close look at the encamped Romans. Finally, at dawn, as the sun rose, they noticed movement. Exhausted from a long day of fighting and a night of being on high alert, the Numidians were anything but information. But the Romans were. The Roman hornblowers gave a signal to launch an all-out attack. The cavalry and legions shouted their battle cry and burst down the hill.
That surprises me. Sort of.
The Mauri and Gaetulians were scattered in their encampments, not expecting a sudden, coordinated rush.
Dang.
According to Sallust, the Mauri and Gaetulians, suddenly being awakened by this strange and terrible sound, were incapable of feeling or of arming themselves, or indeed taking any action at all. Their enemy was upon them, and no help was at hand. The shouting and din, the confusion and terror, had made them frantic with fear. In the end, they were completely routed. Most of their standards and arms were taken, and more were killed than in any previous battle, for they were too tired and too much dazed by the sunrise to make good their escape. The result of the battle was inconclusive, although
I don't think it is inconclusive. I think the Romans did what they could do, and they won that battle.
Sallust implies Marius obliterated a large part of Jugurtha's army. What happened next contests this claim. Only a few days later, an even larger army ambushed the Romans, resulting in the decisive Second Battle of Cirta. The end of the war was coming closer, and both Marius and Jugurtha felt it. There would be just one more final, decisive battle.
The Second Battle of Cirta. Well, the First Battle of Cirta, I mean, once again, the Numidians, Maurians, they looked like they had them. They were 2-1. It looked like they got them basically pretty. They've ambushed them on the first one, on the first battle that we watched, the Battle of the River Muthul. Right, Muthul. Yeah, Muthul River. The first battle of Sitna. They basically ambushed them. Basically, I mean, they were in their camps. Some scouts gave them like a little bit of a heads up. So we see a continuation of that. Try surprising, because it's not a pitched battle. They know they will not win a pitched battle. They just know that. They have to create some sort of like intangibles to give them even a chance. I imagine that would be a similar fashion of this battle. Or it's just going to be a decisive Roman just collapsing the Numidians and the Maurians or whatever. Let's see what we got. Second Battle of Cirta.
The Jugurthine War had been waging on for 6 years. Rogue King Jugurtha engaged in a prolonged guerrilla-like war against Rome. Multiple commanders had failed to defeat the king, and it wasn't until the incorruptible Metellus took over command that the Romans achieved several victories. However, scheming and plotting by his deputy Gaius Marius led to his removal of command and the young ambitious Marius to take over. As the campaign of 106 BC was running to its end, Marius's command suffered its baptism of fire. At the First Battle of Cirta, his army was ambushed by a force of 60,000 Mauri and Gaetulian cavalry.
And of course they said that they had somewhere between 30 and 40,000, so it's like almost a 2-to-1.
Sources conflict on what happened next, although the Romans certainly defeated Jugurtha. As they emerged victoriously, Marius ordered his army to continue the march to their winter quarters, instead of following up the victory and defeating the king once and for all. But the events following Marius's victory at the First Battle of Cirta contest the account that Jugurtha suffered a significant defeat. Marius took great precautions not to suffer an ambush again. The entire trek to his winter quarters, his army would march in battle formations.
I think that's just being ready. I mean, they might have seen some things out there. I mean, we saw a little bit of this when they were there on the hills. They're like, be quiet. You know, maybe it's just like the chess move versus like thinking that it's because they are, losing or something.
His deputy, Sulla, commanded the rear in a square formation, while he commanded the vanguard. Marius tasked his scouts to keep an eye on Jugurtha's army and watch out for possible ambushes. On the 4th day of marching, Marius received worrying reports from these scouts. Hostile troops were approaching the Romans from every direction. Moreover, Jugurtha's army size and composition differed wildly from whichever story Marius decided to believe. Confused and unsure of what to expect, he ordered his legionaries to maintain their battle formation and to prepare for the worst.
Makes sense.
This turned out to be the right call. Before too long, his legionaries trembled at the screams of tens of thousands Mauri and Gaetulian horsemen and soldiers. Their battle cries marked the beginning of an attack by Jugurtha's largest army thus far. The first thing the Romans realized was the positioning of the enemy. They were surrounded. 4 columns charged towards them from every side. According to Sallust, Jugurtha commanded approximately 90,000 troops, his largest force thus far.
Jeez.
We don't have an exact figure for the Roman army, but it is safe to assume
Probably 40,000 to 50,000.
they were outnumbered. Subsequently, the Mauri charged into the flanks commanded by Sulla and Marius, whereas the Gaetulians charged into the main Roman body. But not all columns attacked at the same time. Sulla was the first to engage in battle against the charging Mauri cavalry. He ordered his infantry to defend the baggage train, while his cavalry resisted the horsemen as best as they could. Besides ferocious close combat between the horsemen and the legionaries, the Romans also suffered hails of javelins thrown by the horsemen, unable to reach Sulla's line. But although some horsemen could not reach Sulla's line, Bocchus' son Volux commanded the Mauri infantry. More mobile, these charged straight into any open area they could find. The Roman vanguard had suffered a similar charge as this was going on, except by a larger force, personally commanded by Jugurtha. This mixed infantry cavalry force engaged in the fiercest battle yet, as Marius' vanguard tried their best to hold their positions and the Jugurthine army gave it their all to break through. The rearguard saw a more apparent division of power. Sulla's men made serious inroads against the Mauri. The final breaking point was Sulla's cavalry. As they inflicted heavy damage against the Mauri lines, the panic spread among these horsemen. Before too long,
Just like that. Just like that.
most of them were routed and they began fleeing.
Look at the difference though in size. It just shows you the discipline and not even discipline, the skill gap.
Sulla decided to give chase with his cavalry. As a result, he left the flank of the
Whoa.
Roman center entirely exposed. Bocchus, who arrived later to the battle, used this by flanking the Roman lines and enveloping them. When word reached Jugurtha that Bocchus finally arrived, giving battle at the Roman rear, he left the vanguard to ride towards him between friendly lines. Although sources don't specify anything regarding the 4th attacking column, it is assumed that combat emerged on every flank of the Romans by this time. They were hard pressed due to the simultaneous assaults and
Like, I'm getting Kanai vibes here, but I know it's very different. Very, very different.
numerical superiority of Jugurtha's army. When Bocchus and Jugurtha saw each other, Jugurtha cried out in fluent Latin that the Romans were fighting in vain since he had personally killed Marius shortly before. Jugurtha displayed a bloodied sword to emphasize his point. Some turmoil spread among the legionaries, unsure of what to make of Jugurtha's claims.
Wow.
But before doubt could take over, salvation arrived for the Romans. It arrived in the form of Sulla's returning cavalry. They abandoned their chase of the fleeing Mauri
Good. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened.
and instead crashed into Bocchus' flank. The charge was so brutal that Bocchus did not even bother to resist it. Instead, with many casualties upon impact, he decided to flee the battle together with whatever remained of his cavalry.
Wow.
Bocchus abandoning the battlefield left Jugurtha isolated. The Numidian king tried to rouse his men to fight with his speech and through leading by example, but the lack of discipline among his soldiers and the structured drilled and battle-hardened Romans began gaining the upper hand everywhere. Moreover, his levied soldiers, mostly from rural areas, were no match for the Roman veterans. As they tried to keep up the fight, Sulla's cavalry managed to surround Jugurtha. Together with his loyal subordinates, Jugurtha resisted ferociously. Brief savage combat broke out, but they were no match for Sulla's cavalry. Sallust reveals that, but through all on Jugurtha's side and left were slain, he broke through alone, escaping amid a shower of weapons.
Probably the bodyguards.
As this was going on, Marius
It's just gonna be a snowball.
emerged victoriously from the vanguard. Scattering their opponents, Marius and his bodyguard swerved around to flank the Mauri and Gaetulians, fighting on the flanks and rear. With the situation entirely reversed, suddenly Jugurtha's army found itself fighting on every flank and being attacked in the rear. Before too long, most soldiers realized they were on the back foot and fled in a panic. Upon seeing their king escape, the last warriors resisting the Roman bulwark broke rank and fled. Sallust described the chase. There was a fearful sight in the open plains of pursuit, slaughter, or capture. Horses and men were thrown to the ground, many of them wounded, without the strength to escape or the will to remain still, struggled to get up, only to collapse immediately. As far as the eye could see, the battlefield was strewn with weapons, armor, and corpses, with patches of bloodied earth showing between them. Despite the exact number of casualties unknown, it is safe to assume Jugurtha's army was dealt a very decisive blow. Marius.
Yeah, like just like the first two battles that we witnessed, the one on the river and the first battle of Cirta, they tried to ambush. They tried to use overwhelming force. Did not work. Twice. 3 times.
His objectives shifted in the aftermath of the Second Battle of Cirta. Although Jugurtha once again escaped, the focus did not remain on capturing or killing the Numidian king in battle. Instead, he sent a diplomatic envoy to Bocchus. The Mauritanian king lost a large part of his army during the previous battles. Moreover, he understood the implications of his gamble against Rome. There was no way he would be able to avoid Rome's vengeance. Within a week of losing the battle, he sent a diplomatic envoy to Marius to open negotiations. After some back and forth, Bocchus received a very clear offer: deliver Jugurtha, and Rome would forgive his participation in the war. Marius's deputy Sulla traveled to Bocchus's court to negotiate the deal. But, according to Sallust, Bocchus schemed with Jugurtha in the background to abduct Sulla and to hold him as ransom to
Bruh, y'all are so stupid.
sue for peace. Although it is doubtful if this would have worked. After all, at the time Sulla was only a deputy commander of lower nobility, it is speculation to think otherwise. All that is known is that Bocchus invited both Sulla and Jugurtha to his court. He kept both parties in the dark of his actual loyalty until the final moment. But Bocchus understood Rome's might, so when the opportunity presented itself, he had Jugurtha's bodyguard assassinated and the king arrested. He handed him over to Sulla, who, together with Marius, brought him to Rome.
And he probably died in a triumph.
According to Orosorius, Marius's triumph on January 1st, 104 BC, saw Jugurtha and his 2 sons paraded on the streets. Plutarch reveals how the king met his end. We are told that when Jugurtha had been led in triumph, he lost his reason, and that when, after the triumph, he was cast into prison, where some tore the tunic from his body and others were so eager to snatch away his golden earring that they tore off the lobe of his ear, and when he had been thrust down naked into the dungeon pit, in utter bewilderment, and with a grin on his lips, he said, "Hercules, how cold his Roman bath is." But the wretch, after struggling with hunger for 6 days and up to the last moment clinging to the desire for life, paid the penalty which his crimes deserved. We don't know why Jugurtha ended up meeting with Bocchus at his court. Sallust and Orosorius implicitly ascribe it to naivety, although a man of Jugurtha's cunning must have known Bocchus had no other option but to betray him.
Well, when you're in that sort of like mindset as he was very, it seems like this guy was very much an egomaniac. Maybe, that's an assumption, but It seems that because of like where he was, he thought Bacchus was a friend, and there's no way, no way. Remember, they had to assassinate his bodyguard just to be able to capture him. So
We will never know for sure. All that is known is that the man who challenged Rome's might for years with decent success eventually met his end in
well, decent success is a stretch. I guess attrition, yeah.
a Roman dungeon. Bacchus ended up receiving his reward. He was named ally of the Roman people, retained his Mauritanian crown, and gained a third of western Numidia.
Wow.
Jugurtha's half-brother Gauda was confirmed as a new king, and the Gaetulians became an independent entity from Numidia. Ironically, Bacchus was the tangible victor of the war. Having gambled on the wrong side initially, his kingdom was small when the war broke out. Yet by the time it ended, its territory and might increase significantly.
I think that if this was to end a lot quicker versus being a 6-7 year war, they would have probably went after him. I think a lot of people were just tired of this situation.
Not to mention the power being Rome's ally brought with it. It wasn't until Rome's 2 civil wars half a century later that Numidia was partitioned, with the western part retaining its independence. In contrast, the eastern part was added to the Roman province of Africa. Another century later, in 40 AD, Caligula annexed the kingdom and divided it into 2 new provinces. It certainly is a fascinating history, but those tales are for another time.
Cinema, beautiful, loved it. Jugurthine War, check. We did not know about it, now we do. Crazy how butterfly effect these things are, but it makes perfect sense, right? How he was fighting with Scipio in the early parts of in Iberia, and he was the son of Micipsa or something like that. Adopted. They're gonna share the kingdom with his 2 less able sons. Did not work out that way. Killed one son. Another son eventually died after a siege. And then killed some Romans. If they did not kill Romans, would they have left him alone for a little bit longer? I think so. I think if he wasn't as harsh on the Italians or Romans, whatever, he might have been, he would have been there, and he probably would have been, it might have been 10 years or something. Eventually, he probably would have pissed the Romans off, but maybe not. Who knows? Who knows what would have happened? But then these battles, I mean, they were never going to win any of these battles. They knew they had a chance if they could have like somehow utilized intangibles, whether it be at dark, catch them while they're sleeping, ambush them from the hills, send them from all sides, grab Bacchus as an ally, get the other tribes as allies. Did not matter. Rome has a pipeline of troops. They could have kept sending. It was inevitable. But it was an interesting part of the histories of Rome. Thank you guys for being here. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and see to it that you give us some video recommendations for us to do in the future. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.